Do you guys think there is such thing as timeless music?
Yeah. Have you ever listened to Prince?
Of course
Beatles.
I love Prince.
Yeah.
I'm a huge Beatles fan.
I think timeless music is one of those things that it changes, and we think of certain things as being timeless because we measure things in the scale of like human life. But if you think about it, music has existed as long as humanity has, but we don't listen to music from, 1,000 years ago. We like to inflate things as being timeless because we associate things as like, oh, this is the best thing that we've seen in 40 years, 50 years, 80 years, 100 years. But if you look at it in the grand scheme of like the universe, like 1,000 years from now, I really don't think most of the music that we talk about, if any of it, is going to have any sort of relevance. I don't think music is meant to be timeless.
Except Hey Ya by Outkast. That song never gets old.
Timeless has not been defined in our lifetime, and it will not be. It just won't. That's the point of timeless.
I think timelessness is a excellent thing to strive for. Wanting to make music that will still speak to people in 100 years is very valiant.
I think one of the things that makes something like quote unquote timeless is authenticity. Because if you're doing the same thing that 1,000 other artists have done, and you're doing it for the sake of trying to fit in the boundaries of like a genre, then that music will not be timeless. In fact, will be incredibly dated. Versus if you do what you feel is authentic to yourself, something like that will be substantially more like quote unquote timeless, because people will resonate with that authenticity for generations.
Let's think above this. We may very well be in the era of timeless, more so because let's think of recording. Recording has come a long way in the last 80 years. Timeless wasn't a thing in the 1800s because recording wasn't a thing in the 1800s. We are stuck to the machines we're recording to. The only reason we haven't heard 14th century songs as much as we want to is not only because we think it's dog shit, it's because when have you heard it? Because it can't be recorded. But we are so easily accessible to this internet that we've established. Perhaps we can be timeless now. I'm not saying it's not obtainable anymore. Maybe we are in the frame of timelessness.
Well, first off, music in the 14th century was technically recorded, just not audio recorded. It was written down.
It was recorded on sheet music.
Exactly. The stuff we make now can last forever. That's the nature of recording technology. And we're getting this pile up of information. Everything from the start of the 20th century is increasingly accessible. The main question is anyone in the future going to understand what you have to say?
Well, I think the understanding what we have to say definitely is true, but I feel like part of it too is just the enclave of how much music is created. Tens of thousands of hours of music is released every single day. And so I think if you put that in the scheme of like 500 years, 1,000 years, there's going to be so much distance between that stuff. Like, yeah, future generations probably will not resonate with some of those issues. And I think there will be so much distance between current music and future music that all of the people who cared about the future music will be long dead and forgotten about. And I don't think that anybody will know necessarily where to look for some of that music, because I don't think it'll necessarily stand out, because the music of the time 1,000 years from now is going to resonate more with that generation.
Am I weird for thinking that core human struggle has not really differed that much though in all of humanity, to be honest? I mean, core human struggle has prevailed through centuries and centuries and centuries, as far back as we can look in the history books, honestly.
Well, core human struggle is something that like there's always been kind of like keynotes that humanity has struggled with, whether it's like oppressive governments, plague, poverty. Like there's always been things that people struggle with, but I think the struggles themselves definitely change generation to generation. If you go back, 60 years, one of the big things that people were struggling with was like racial inequality and war. And while some of those things still affect like the current population, it's not as wide scale as it was 60, 80 years ago.
We're still struggling with race and war, but what race looks like and what war looks like, the shape of them has changed dramatically.
Mm-hmm.
Can you not find the mindset that they were in, though? I mean, I think through categorized and written history, even though I wasn't alive in the 60s, I can pretty safely understand what was going on at that point and still sympathize to an extent about it, if not empathize at least.
I do think these are all like universal human struggles in some capacity, but they manifest in specific historical ways. Having access to historical information is incredibly important. Like, we can appreciate music literature from the 60s pretty well because we have a lot of information. Like, if you go back to classical Greece, there's like passages from Plato, Aristotle, passages from Homer. Like, nobody knows what the implications are because we don't know that language. We are not part of that culture. We'll never know what it was like to be an ancient Greek reading Homer.
I don't know. I don't think it takes much semblance of understanding time to understand enough to appreciate the literature, I guess is what I'm saying. So in that sense, there's no saying that people 300, 400, 500 years from now can't at least look back to our point in time in history, especially with how well we've written our history out nowadays, to at least appreciate the time capsule that is that time and appreciate it in an empathetic way, I guess is what I'm saying.
I think the fact that we still do talk about people like Homer and some of the ancient Greek philosophers, I think that does show kind of proving the testament that there is the potentiality of timelessness, because even though it's a different media, the fact that we still talk about them like 2,000 years later kind of does show the testament that certain things do resonate throughout time.
I have a slight bummer on the topic. Back when like the Odyssey and Iliad were written, 100% of it was fully transmitted through spoken word. So people had to spend hours and hours with this content and not just like reading it like with another person explaining it to them and telling them what the story is. So these were forced to be a thing burnt into somebody's brain who their almost like job in life was to recite these stories, because the Iliad and the Odyssey are multi-hour stories. So someone had to have this story memorized. Am I tripping? It's multi-hour.
It's a full day to read it. Yeah.
Yeah. Someone had to be able to recite this for an extended period of time. And that was like, yeah, their motive in life was to recount this epic. And then they also still had to go like get food for their family and all this other stuff. Like, that's what kind of like hurts my soul a little bit. Is I know there's a lot of songs I can recite all the lyrics to, but there's also ones I can't.
There's nothing you can spend an entire day reciting from memory and entertain a crowd of people. That's not a role that exists in modern society.
It's just a different way of how we work with like this medium, because we have like things that we say can store all this information, so we don't need to memorize it or internalize it necessarily.
Yeah.
That's the comforts of technology.
I know, but what if it suddenly goes away? What if it gets, like, my phone has deleted my entire music library 4 times. I don't know what songs I'm missing out on.
Back then, too, like, since there was less of a diversity of those things, like, there was kind of a monoculture.
There were only so many people who did shrooms and actually, like, were enlightened.
Yeah, there's very much like a monoculture that was being established. And so people would dedicate their entire lives to learning these epics, as opposed to nowadays there's so much music that I think the diversity almost forces things to be less timeless.
I'll also say the threat of technology failing us is one, but I'm more concerned about what music technology is going to look like 300 years from now. Because, like Julian pointed out, recording technology has advanced so much in the last 100 years. Our idea of what music is completely changed from the start of the 20th century. Before that, it was a contingent experience. You heard a song only once, ever. The next time you heard it, it would be probably a different group performing a different arrangement. At the very least, slightly nuanced, because live music's contingent. I don't know, 300 years from now, maybe we're going to get this information implanted via Neuralink, and so it won't even take time to listen to music.
Yeah.
You'll just like hit a button, you'll experience a song instantly, and our current idea of how music unfolds over time is going to be flipped over.
The perfect example is Scruggs-style banjo playing versus contemporary before that.
Oh, God.
Before Scruggs-style banjo playing, you would just pick whatever the hell you wanted to pick, and then you would pick that up from whoever taught you how to do that. Scruggs-style was the first true banjo style to be recorded and taught in that sort of method, and it completely revolutionized banjo playing.
Yeah, I mean, old time and bluegrass was fundamentally a like call and response thing for so long before then. And that's why banjo's tuned how it is. Like it's open strumming is a G, and then you'd retune it if it was in a different key or you'd retune the high string if it was a 5 string. But yeah, no, bluegrass trips me out.
But here's the thing, if we fear the recording process and the internet process, do you think Homer, do you think Aristotle, do you think all these people feared that their way of recording was going to be obsolete? No. I don't think it should stop us from fearing timelessness. I think we should appreciate it and continue upon it.
It definitely shouldn't staple the creativity, because regardless on if it's going to be timeless, like you should still create the art that you feel true in the moment.
I think the most important thing is to create something that feels timeless to the people who are listening to it in your time, and something that in the future people can reflect on and appreciate intellectually as something that speaks to a notion about what it means to be human in a historical way. Like a lot of what happened in the 60s, like music from the 60s, it's a lot of it's cheesy because they were revolutionizing music. They were reacting to things, entirely new problems, like the issue of desegregation that, I mean, we've experienced over and over again in all these different ways. It's mutated. And now, like, racial politics is very much a part of our culture in a way that they were still struggling with in the 60s.
Yeah, very much so.
And we're in a place where we can look back to the 60s, and if you know what's happening, and if you understand the state of recording technology and politics and all these things converging, and you throw on, like, I don't know, Blonde on Blonde, it's Aegis' favorite example. Yeah, you feel something. You understand this is as close to a timeless album as you can get. It's never going to hit us the same as it hit anyone in the 60s. That's not possible anymore. We understand it as timeless because it is incredibly situated in time. It's a strange contradiction, but the timeless albums are the ones that speak to their time.
Yeah, most definitely.
Timelessness to me doesn't mean that it's going to be resonating through every generation beyond it. Timeless to me is encapsulating the time you're in to a point that everybody beyond it is going to look back and go, that was that time. That was that period. Because everybody we look back to that we look at as timeless, we're actually looking back to and going, they perfectly encapsulate their time period.
Every new metal band is loving every word you're saying right now.
I know I'm stroking a lot of egos here. I'm fully aware.